Hey everyone, Nathan here over at Logitech. Today I have another great guest. This time it's Mike Thornback from AVI-SPL Canada. Tell us a little bit about your role.
So I lead the Canadian Unified Communications practice, so I'm responsible for everything we do with pre and post sales UC, from specification to implementation to support.
Awesome. So let's talk about AI in the context of meeting rooms. The AI is like every billboard has AI. Everything seems to have AI these days. Talk about meeting rooms because obviously there's so many different pieces. Talk about how AI is evolving meeting rooms specifically.
Okay. AI is really, at least in its infancy, starting out as an additive to existing meetings. And the biggest role that it plays is actually trying to simplify the meeting experience for the people that are participating in the meeting in what would otherwise be probably a supporting cast role. So things like meeting notes, action items, and trying to develop a lot of the administrivia that comes out as a consequence of meetings, a lot of the artifacts that are the next steps that happen after a meeting.
Sure.
AI starts to simplify a lot of those roles that have typically been someone being like the scribe in a meeting or whatever. They've taken a lot of those components out of the meeting and made it more about full participation and being able to use the entirety of your brain to have a fulsome conversation around a topic. And probably is bringing new ideas into those conversations because now you're not really worried about who said what during a meeting. And as a consequence of that, also, when you're talking about hybrid meetings, it doesn't matter whether those people are in the room or they're not with things like speaker attribution, because now everyone's action items make it onto the roster, and it doesn't matter whether they're in the room and they can remind someone after the meeting's ended or not. AI is going to capture them regardless.
It's interesting because I feel like speaker framing has been around for decades, but it was until we went home, we had this great experience, everyone was represented well in a meeting. But then we came back and we're like, wait, this is not going to work. We're like, we need to see everyone individually, otherwise we can't hear them, we can't see them. And it just so happens that AI was already around. And so we started using it to build it. But I agree, it's so much more now. It's not just about smart framing, but it's about speaker attribution, putting the badges and the labels and the windows who you're talking about, and then transcription too. Transcription's another big area.
There's this concept that's been around for a lot of years that video is the new voice.
Sure.
And I think that with AI, you're creating an environment where video is critically important, but now audio becomes that much more critical as well with the concepts of things like speaker attribution, because now you can really marry those two things together. And then when you do AI for things like transcripts, and you can do live scrubbing for when things happened in conversations and pick up where you joined a meeting and then go back to the beginning for the things you missed, or after a meeting be able to go as a post attendee and scrub through and figure out where a certain topic was talked about and be able to dive into it in more detail. Those things make AI that much more rich and fulsome to conversations as well.
I'll be honest, I never liked taking notes in meetings, and now I don't have to, so that's fantastic. So tell me what you're seeing in terms of customers adopting hybrid and where they're at.
It was a great article by Harvard Business Review a couple of years ago during the height of COVID, and they talked about the 5 real challenges of hybrid work being communication, coordination, connection, creativity, and culture. The thing about all of these is that the technology underpinning hybrid work is very critical to establishing new norms around hybrid work. It doesn't matter whether you're in the office or not.
Sure.
And so if you think about corporate real estate for a minute, corporate real estate for years has been talking about work as what you do at the office, what you do at home, and this concept of a third place, or what we used to think about as like a road warrior type knowledge worker class. And in the world of hybrid work, one of the evolutions in terms of thinking that customers have needed to make is this idea of what happens in the meeting room is critically important. And the table stakes that were there when we all went home during the pandemic, as you've already pointed out, don't really translate when you go back into the office. And so the new norm being everyone having intelligent video, being able to be identified actively and accurately in meetings becomes important, but also the ability for people to collaborate in a way that is consistent with how their organization is structured becomes that much more important. And so the ideas of culture coming up and into this and the role that technology plays in it become a very different conversation, because where culture for many years and the efficacy of culture was really defined by how many bums were in seats, has now evolved to what tools are there to not only facilitate collaboration, but to help me gather information about how resources within my corporation or my business are being consumed. And those resources can be physical resources like meeting spaces, but they can also be resources like video calls in the virtual world. How are the resources, the licenses, and all of the things that go into the day-to-day operation of my business, how do they actually come together, and what is the actual ROI that my business is getting as a consequence of that? The ROI that my business is getting as a consequence of that.
I feel like we've gone through 18 months of this. Do you feel like people have figured out what the right mix is, or do you think this is just going to be an ongoing thing over time?
I think that there's going to be a rebalancing of this that goes on periodically. I don't think that the new norm is the forever norm. I think that we're past a point where we can say that is like we're going to find an equilibrium that everyone agrees with anymore.
Yeah.
But I think that the flexibility inherent in that isn't a bad thing, as long as the way that your organization has decided to enable its workers is consistent with that. And so they have the ability to work the same way from the office as they do from their house. And when we talk about the return to office and trying to entice workers back to the office, a lot of that conversation comes down to you have the kind of the carrot and stick approach.
Yeah.
We all know what the stick is, but the carrot really becomes this idea of collaboration as a destination. Mm-hmm. What are the things that bring you into the office? Some of it's people, some of it's process, but ultimately some of it is just what are the things that enable me to do my job better in an office that I can't do in my home office. Yeah. Often that's collaborating with people, but it's also the technology that underpins those conversations. Things like whiteboarding, things like being able to go into a room and sit down and work over a piece or a project together that you can do over video, but is more authentic to the way potentially your business collaborates in person, right? Yeah. Some problems are best tackled without a screen in the way. That's never going to change. That's human nature. But the more that we can make the return to office a frictionless experience, the more you'll entice your workers to come back to the office just inherently without the stick.
I don't know who came up with earning the commute. Like, we have to earn the commute. And some are like, what do you mean? It's a job. You have to come back to the office. Just come back. But it's not that simple anymore, right? Especially if you're in a type of role. And I do believe this is role-based. I think it really depends on the organization, but I do believe that, yes, now we do have to earn the commute if we want people to come back. And that does mean understanding their personal needs, how they want to work in the office. The spaces they need are now also different. It used to be just let's build a bunch of conference rooms and call it a day. Now there are different requirements. There's multi-screen requirements. You might have to be multi-platform to access different video technologies. You might have to have different multi-cam scenarios in the rooms, whiteboarding, stuff like that. So it's definitely, I think, woken up everyone to understand truly what technology is required to get the job done, whether that's remote or on a train or physically in the office. So I think it's pretty exciting.
It's absolutely exciting. And I think, honestly, the next frontier of collaboration in the enterprise is going to be around the data of where the physical space meets the virtual space.
Yeah.
So you see that the market starting to answer with tools that are going to be able to marry up information about when your employees are in the office versus when they're working from home, how many meetings they're having in a day, a week, and a month. And then there's underpinning technologies from all sorts of vendors out in the market around adding scheduling panels and the analytics that are tied to that, from how many people were in the meeting room, what was the temperature in the meeting room, how does that tie to base building systems for the comfort of the people that were in that room, and taking a measured approach to all of the different pieces of data and using that as what establishes what was, to your point earlier, I'm just going to put some meeting rooms out there, right?
Yeah.
Now it's going to be establishing a baseline and using all of this information to create an intelligent approach towards how do you outfit the office of the future, and then how does that evolve and as the needs of your workers evolve over time.
All right, Mike, I know I've taken a lot of your time, but thank you for being on today. Appreciate it.
It's my pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
All right, thanks again. And that's another episode, folks. Catch us next time.